Hey guys, it's Lady and welcome back to this series of videos where I break down everything about our favorite Genshin characters. From stories unlocked via raising companionship levels, to voice lines said by other characters, to appearances in event quests, and so on. In other words, whether you don't have a specific character, can't be bothered to raise their companionship levels, need a refresher, or just want the basic TLDR of a character's text, then this ultimate lore guide is for you. Thanks to her rerun and inclusion in patch 2.3's main event, this video will focus on the Spindrift Knight hailing from Mondstadt, Eula Lawrence. So let's begin by going over the lore from her character stories that are unlocked via companionship leveling. I just think this info will provide better context to Eula's actions during her actual appearances in-game, which we'll discuss later. So with that said, probably the most notable thing about Eula is, unfortunately, all the prejudice she faces from the general public of Mondstadt, despite her sterling achievements in the Knights of Favonius as captain of its reconnaissance company. This prejudice stems from Eula's background as a descendant of the Lawrence clan, or in other words, the paragon of an old aristocracy that once enslaved the people of Mondstadt during a dark period in its history. Old wounds still fester among the general citizenry all these centuries later, though it's not entirely unfounded given that the remains of the Lawrence clan to this day still treat the common folk as if they were mere peasants, and furthermore, have not even given up in their attempts to restore the former glory of the aristocracy. So because of this, everyone in Mondstadt sees Eula as a frosty outsider, and even as a potential mole for the nobility at first glance. Shops would refuse to sell their goods to her, and restaurants would often screw up her orders. Eula's natural response of vengeance or grievances only increased the guard the citizens put up around her. Though in reality, the public's alarm was all just a big misunderstanding, since this vengeance Eula speaks of is just a figure of speech she's adopted due to the strict, if not borderline abusive, upbringing she endured as her clan's eldest daughter. Since the Lawrence clan must always be prepared to retake the city and establish their aristocratic dominance once more, Eula underwent an incredibly harsh educational regime during her childhood. Though that actually brings us to the topic of her graceful dancing skill. You see, Mondstadt's folklore states that the nobility viewed art as second only to traditional etiquette among their most prized assets. Apparently, the noble clans jointly created an artistic ritual known as the Dance of Sacrifice, of which the third act was specifically representative of the Lawrence clan. This was a solo dance called Flickering Candlelight that was traditionally performed by the eldest daughter of the family. But since many years have passed since the nobility's glory days, a lack of tutors has regulated this dance to just an artistic pastime instead of the mandatory part of the curriculum it used to be. Nevertheless, Eula found it a relaxing pastime and a welcoming respite from the other grueling courses she endured during youth. Though she seems to have left this activity largely behind nowadays, the distinctive, dance-like aesthetic of her blade work clearly takes inspiration from her skill in dance. But speaking of her combat prowess, Eula is one of only a handful to have passed her clan's difficult martial trial in the last 1,000 years. Those who were successful have traditionally taken up the Lawrence family crest, the glacial seal, which symbolizes the clan's highest martial ability, as well as their aspirations to reclaim their position of power. But as we all know, These aspirations to former glory mean nothing to Eula, so she swiftly departed the family once she received this badge of honor, and has had barely any contact with them since. Fortunately for Eula, the Knights of Favonius are only interested in a person's ability and not their family history. In fact, Grandmaster Varka has had nothing but the highest praise for her, claiming she's the Dandelion Knight's equal on the battlefield. However, most of the other knights remained very skeptical of Eula. For example, every new recruit that Jean sends to the reconnaissance captain always starts off with a negative view of her, their perception only shifting after witnessing how flawlessly she carries out the knight's duties and abides by Mondstadt's laws. But fast forwarding to present day, and Eula has gained the unconditional support of all the reconnaissance company members under her leadership. The general public's view has been much tougher to crack, though it has been shifting thanks to Amber's efforts. You see, the energetic outrider always spreads the news about Eula's great accomplishments to the city folk of Mondstadt. One example is when Eula saved the life of a top legal expert from Liyue, aka Yanfei. I'll elaborate on this story a bit later in the video, but for now let's get back to Eula and Amber's close relationship. Since everyone in Mondstadt loves Amber, shopkeepers will sell their goods at regular price to Eula when she's around, and will sometimes even chat with the Lawrence descendant for a bit. Meanwhile, Amber enjoys accompanying Eula on these errands and trips out, since the two of them are actually longtime friends, from way back before either of them had joined the Knights' ranks. You see, Eula was actually mentored by Amber's grandfather, the founding member of the Outriders. He was the one who taught Eula that she first had to discover herself before she could come to terms with, and ultimately break free of, the heavy burden she felt as a descendant of the Lawrence clan. It's only thanks to his guidance that Eula finally was able to grapple with her conflicted life, eventually finding herself on the gentle path of revenge that is hers alone. Even if it may be articulated in grievances or vengeance, it's something both strong and kind at its core. It was at this very moment she arrived at this path that her vision first appeared before her. This direction that she's decided for herself also ties into why she's known as the Spindrift Knight. Spindrift referring to ocean spray, by the way, instead of something like the Glacier Knight, as in reference to the Lawrence clan's glacial seal. Eula prefers to be free and unbound like the ocean, instead of something cold and unyielding like ice. So this mentality has shaped her tactics out on the field where her company patrols the coastline. She uses a bone whistle to mimic the sound of ocean waves, successfully tricking the enemy and sending them into a panic at the thought of an incoming tsunami, hence her earned title, the Spindrift Knight. But now with her background covered, I think it's a good time to move on to Eula's appearances in the actual game. So Act 1 of her story quest begins when the traveler is asked to look into these troubling reports of the Lawrence clan becoming increasingly associated with the Fatui. Since high tensions continue to exist between the Knights and the remnants of the Lawrence clan to this day, the Traveler is the best candidate to conduct these investigations since they have no background tying them to Mondstadt's history. Though, unfortunately, the Traveler has little luck on their first attempt at speaking with this Schubert Lawrence, since the man refuses to talk to someone as unrefined as us. So Amber suggests we look for her good friend Eula Lawrence up near Stormbearer Mountain, where upon first meeting her, we're already placed on her personal list of vengeance for stealing her Fatui targets. This is quite the confusing and mixed message, given that she doesn't actually sound that angry, and that she did save us from getting sniped by the final Fatui of the group. Nevertheless, she agrees to begin our training in noble etiquette immediately after learning that Amber was the one who referred us. The first lesson involves learning the required noble formalities of proper conversation. Eula explains various phrases, but merely having it done in this manner is a bit too abstract to grasp. So Paimon asks if Eula can demonstrate via actual example instead. What follows is the only time in this entire story quest where Eula appears hesitant, and it soon becomes apparent why, since her attempts at speaking to random bystanders do nothing but either confuse or offend them. Traveler quickly says they've seen enough, and Eula is happy to hear that we still learned something from this at the very least. The nobility training continues up on Dragonspine and involves such things as traversing difficult terrain and fighting mobs, all without being staggered or taking a single blow, since that would be unsightly. This training clearly shows how she became so skilled in combat herself. She's shown to be surprisingly thoughtful though, when she offers us warm milk after noticing our shivering. She can't have her vengeance if we turn into a popsicle after all. Lastly, we head to Good Hunter to order a gift for Schubert, where we're lucky to catch Amber thanks to our good timing, so the three all sit down to lunch together. Here, it's easy to see how great the two get along, plus Sarah's friendly interactions with Eula instill some hope that other ordinary folks will eventually realize that vengeance is just a front she puts up, when actually she's just a good person who's always willing to help people out. Once the dish, which we'll just shorten to sauerkraut, is ready, we part ways with Eula and head to where Schubert is relaxing. This time we manage to impress him with our etiquette and the gift, to the point where he trusts us completely with the rumored Grand Lawrence scheme. He takes us to a Fatui hideout where he gives the Snezhnayans his crappy but accurate drawings of Mondstadt's defenses in exchange for their help in reinstating the Lawrence clan as the true rulers of Mondstadt. Since this exchange gives us all the evidence we need, Traveler begins dealing with these nefarious colluders, though Schubert manages to sneak away while we're still fighting the Fatui. He doesn't make it far though, since he's placed under arrest by his very own niece, Eula. Schubert hurls derogatory insults at her and calls her a traitor to the family, but Eula stands firm, reprimanding her uncle for daring to risk the lives of so many innocents. Unlike him, she knows right from wrong and what freedom means to the people of Mondstadt, so she'll make certain the Lawrence clan never fulfills their aspirations to re-establish their dominance. Her knight subordinates then take him away, while we accompany Eula in retrieving that diagram of Mondstadt's defenses he drew. Once that's successfully recovered, the Traveler asks Eula why she followed us to this hideout in the first place. And so, though she attempts to pass it off as her way of exacting her vengeance on us, by capturing our targets this time since we're guilty of doing the same thing to her earlier today, deep down, the Traveler understands Eula really was just worried about them. Now as for Patch 2.3's main event quest, Shadows Amidst Snowstorms, Eula is happily surprised when Joel, the only kid at Dragonspine's base camp, takes to her immediately, given how she rarely receives such a warm welcome. He even calls her Auntie Eula. As Amber and Joel race off to build some snowmen, we're informed that the Adventurers Guild really is just one mentor short for their special recruit training event, since one instructor hasn't shown up yet. We later find out this missing instructor is Bad Luck Bennett, by the way. Traveler insists Eula takes this open spot, secretly hoping that this will be an opportunity for more people to see how great the Spindrift Knight really is. We don't see Eula again until she's marching up to Traveler, the now rescued Bennett, and Albedo, accusing the latter of the three of leading Joel towards a dangerous monster-infested area, then having the audacity to attack her when she tried to stop him. Long story short, Albedo insists that she must have met an imposter, and since the Traveler can currently back this up, Eula is willing to believe him for the time being. Then she begins the journey back to the base of the mountain with Amber and Bennett. A few days later, Albedo and Traveler find the three barely making their way out of a dangerous commotion right outside Albedo's camp. Turns out they still haven't made it back down to base camp thanks to Bennett's awfully bad luck. Though Eula doesn't appear worn down at all, she agrees that spending the night at Albedo's camp would be a good idea for them to replenish their energy. Later that night, she and Amber head off to take an ice bath together after dinner, which was actually just Eula's endearing way of escaping her embarrassment when Amber started sharing details about their wholesome friendship over the campfire. Then in the morning, Eula immediately grabs and shields her wifey from a freak avalanche, then is the first one to launch the search and rescue for Bennett and Albedo, both whom fell off the cliff. Once everyone's accounted for, the group still takes a brief rest since Amber and Bennett are still dizzy from hitting their heads. Now, unbeknownst to their pyro friends, both Eula and Traveler have had this suspicious feeling they haven't been able to shake off ever since the avalanche, and the two are just about to discuss this when they're forced to fend off a surprise attack from Albedo? Being the most combat-ready, the two quickly engage this figure in battle, eventually defeating the Whopper Flower it mutates into once Amber, Bennett, and real Albedo join the fray. Immediately afterwards, the ever-astute Eula has already pieced together that this must have been the imposter she encountered a couple days ago. Finally, back at the base of the mountain, she gives Joel and his newly reunited dad, as well as Traveler, some powdered rime, a precious gift she whipped up thanks to her vision. It will prevent snow from melting, allowing us to save the snowmen we made during this event forever. Then she heads back to Mondstadt with Amber. Now, since we already know quite a bit about what Eula thinks of Amber and vice versa, let's take a look at her relationships with other characters, starting with Jean. So technically, even though their families are sworn enemies, Jean has recognized Eula's capabilities early on and gave her many opportunities within the Knights. In fact, the two get along quite well and even get together for tea in Jean's office once a month, though Eula tries to pass it off as them merely sparring. Venti is another animo wielder that Eula has a good opinion of. She's heard his lighthearted and humorous songs which mock the Lawrence clan, and has found them so hilarious that she's actually laughed out loud. Meanwhile, Venti thinks Eula has excellent taste in drinks, since she likes them ice cold. Quite the rare taste in Mondstadt nowadays, much to the bard's chagrin. Unfortunately for Sucrose, her and Eula's relationship is quite awkward now after the unfortunate accident she caused the Spindrift Knight. You see, Sucrose recognizes that Eula's role as a scout is dangerous and was only thinking of her safety when she made a particular device to make infiltrating enemy camps easier. But since Eula gives off such an intimidating air, that made Sucrose really nervous while she was explaining how to use it, meaning she forgot to mention some very important details. Long story short, Eula ended up having to fend off 13 Metatrolls all at once when the device blew her cover. But seeing how panicked Sucrose looked when she heard of the malfunction, Eula could no longer bring herself to exact vengeance on the sheepish alchemist. As for Diluc, he can respect Eula's determination to rid herself of her family's shackles, but then she just had to join the Knights of Favonius. Meanwhile, Eula wants nothing to do with him due to how aloof he always comes across. But honestly, I just think it's really cool how they're such opposites, yet still so alike in some ways. As in, Diluc wields a pyrovision and left the Knights in order to side with family, essentially. Meanwhile, Eula wields cryo, but left her family to join the Knights. Then there also had to be at least some playable character that thought more along the lines of Mondstadt's general public, at least to prove just how poor the Lawrence family's reputation really is. So you see, Tomo only knows one thing about the Lawrence clan, and that's how they're the worst-tempered people ever. He actually suggests we stay clear of all of them, so obviously he doesn't know the real Eula. But he can be forgiven since he hasn't been in Mondstadt in ages. As for Eula's thoughts on some other characters, she does find Lisa annoying at times since the librarian's extensive knowledge of all of Mondstadt's history means she can recall all of the Lawrence clan's most vile past deeds. The Spindrift Knight finds a kindred spirit in Diona though, and respects how the bartender infiltrated a tavern in order to take down the wine industry. Plus, Eula always appreciates good drinks. But speaking of bars and taverns, poor Eula sometimes can't even enjoy her drinks in peace, since normally she'll sit alone at a table, but will sometimes be forced to join others when the establishment gets busy. Lastly, she's heard of Razor and believes he sure must have an easy life, seeing how he's free from society's opinions and familial obligations. But at last we've arrived at the final section of this video, that being just some miscellaneous but important things to know about Eula, starting with that one time she saved Yanfei's life at Dornman Port. So Yanfei was acting as a legal consultant for this merchant vessel from Liyue, which unknowingly picked up some dangerous cargo that was planted by the Abyss Order and disguised to appear just ordinary. While Eula and her knights were en route to recover these dangerous items, Yanfei herself noticed something amiss about the cargo and began investigating by herself. Now, thankfully, Eula arrived only minutes later, otherwise my first pyro DPS I ever pulled probably would have bit the dust. So thank goodness for end user's license agreement. The two women have kept in touch ever since and highly respect the other's cunning, logic, and quick problem solving. In fact, Eula believes Yanfei may be able to help her track down a person she's been looking for. So do you think she's referring to Amber's grandfather here? Or do you think it's someone else who I entirely missed somehow? Maybe it's just me inhaling too much hopium, but perhaps he has something to do with the chasm, considering he's originally from Liyue. If you want to know more about that, by the way, check out my Amber lore guide in the cards. But anyway, I'd love to know your thoughts and theories on where this missing person search plot could be headed. Now, another cool tidbit relating to Eula is how the Reconnaissance Company boasts the best food rations in the entire Knights organization. These moon-shaped pies that are so beloved by her subordinates comes from a recipe she learned from her days of mandatory culinary training, though the rations have been slightly altered to be more portable than the original. Speaking of Eula's culinary skill and tastes, she enjoys making and eating her own unique creations, especially when she gets to share them with people who enjoy eating them as well. On the other hand, though, she swears that rich broths are her sworn enemy. The flavor is too overpowering and leaves you with no room to train afterwards, because it's just too filling. Anyway, to sum up her current lore, Eula is both as admirable as she is endearing. And the fact that she's just as strong in gameplay as they make her out to be in lore is the real icing on the cake for me. I'm really hopeful she'll get even more of a role in future Genshin content, especially considering the future conflict that MiHoYo seems to be foreshadowing between Mondstadt and Ryandaughters' more nefarious creations. But there we have it. Let me know if you learned anything new, or if you think I missed something when it comes to Eula. And all update videos I do for her in the future will be linked in the pinned comment below, by the way. Also, please like this video if you liked it, and subscribe for more of this series. I'm already working on one for Xiao, considering his rerun is just around the corner. Also, hey, just letting you know, you can join our welcoming and active Discord community. Plus, if you happen to like the Trails and/or Persona series, I have a whole separate channel dedicated to those games, so check that out if you wish. But otherwise, thanks so much for watching, guys, and until next time, take care. See ya!